Welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We are working our way through the profound treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And tonight we're on volume 3, chapter 17. And we've assigned as well the 1974 Vajradhatu Seminary transcript, talk 22, on which this chapter is solely based. Personally, I like the transcript better than the chapter, but it's up to each person individually to make their own determination. In any event, let's bow in. And Michael is going to start. Take it away.
Yes, well, extend my welcome as well to everyone, and glad that we actually had an opportunity to read one of these seminary transcripts. I also found the material a little easier to understand reading the transcript, although in fairness, it was after I'd read the chapter in the book a couple of times, so that may have had some influence. But I think it's also nice just to get a feel a little bit for what the actual talks are like, as opposed to how they're put into the compendium form in the profound treasury. And he begins just by asking people if they've had the chance to read previous seminary transcripts. This is from the 1974 seminary, so there have been one the year before. And he points out that in each as it turned out to be, that each seminary he'd be presenting things from a different perspective, or even presenting different material. And so the idea was for people to read the previous transcripts and be familiar with what he had presented before, so that they could gain the advantage of having different perspectives. And I guess that's the advantage actually to the profound treasury, that for instance, in the Mahayana, there's chapters on the different paramitas in the Mahayana, generosity, discipline, and so on. And that's put together from different seminaries where he presented the paramitas. So we have the advantage of being able to read that all at once. In different seminaries were built around different topics. The Hinayana section, for instance, in 1973 focuses largely on practice of meditation, shamatha and vipassana, the foundations of mindfulness. Very powerful presentation. In other seminaries, he presented a different thing. He might present in the seminary that I attended in 1982. He presented a series of talks in the Hinayana on the Sutra of the Recollection of the Three Jewels, the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In 1978, for instance, he talked about the Four Noble Truths. And one of those talks has one of my favorite introductory lines, the beginning of the talk on the third noble truth, the truth of cessation of suffering, where he says, today's subject is cessation, or we could say the only hope. And today turns out to be April Fool's Day, which it was. So, but then he gave a very serious talk on cessation. Anyway, he also introduced different Vajrayana topics at each seminary. And this also reminded me of the preparation that people were asked to go through before applying or being accepted at seminary. I moved to Boulder in 1978. There were a number of classes presented through the local Dharma centers, Karma Zone, and that covered readings from different transcripts, not necessarily all of them, but some of them. Again, especially the seminary talks that focused on a particular topic. For instance, in 1979 seminary, he introduced Lojong, or mind training, as well as the practice of Tonglen. And it was also required that people sit a datun, a month of meditation, before applying to seminary. So there was a lot of preparation and study even before going to seminary. At least that was true in Boulder. I was always told that if you applied from one of the more distant centers, especially a smaller center, the requirements would be greatly relaxed. But again, just a little bit of background. So the idea is that in each seminary, so this was 1974, that the seminaries built on each other as well. And again, I think that's actually the advantage to reading the Profound Treasury. We get all of that material summarized and put together without having to go back and forth between several different seminaries to get all of the information, all of Trungpa Rinpoche's presentation on a particular topic. In any case, in the 1974 transcript, this particular talk, which is again the entire basis for the chapter in the Profound Treasury, is titled Space, and in the Profound Treasury, it's titled The Play of Space and Form. So I wanted to say a few things about the idea of space before actually talking about the different notions or different experiences of space that Trungpa Rinpoche describes. So the idea is, first of all, that in Buddhist system, there are actually 5 elements in contrast to simply earth, air, fire, and water. There's also a 5th element, space. And basically space has no form at all. And because of that, we tend to know space through reference points. For instance, right now, probably all of us are sitting in a room with 4 walls, a floor, and a ceiling. And that's kind of our concept of space, the space that we're in. But the reality is that space, separate from the forms that are built within space, is actually boundless. And this becomes clear when we let go of reference points, such as 4 walls, ceiling, the abstract notions of reference points and boundaries like borders of states or town lines or whatever. And that this actually is an important aspect of space, that ultimately it's ungraspable, that if we contemplate it, we can have some understanding of what it is, but if we try to pin it down, we really can't. And we've encountered the notion of space and working with space before in the Path of Individual Liberation, the compendium that makes up the Hinayana talks. There's actually a chapter titled Mixing Mind with Space. And he says that in that chapter, that's a special Kagyu practice technique, which is the experience of where thoughts arise, where they dwell, and where they go. And that these 3 are accomplished, being able to see where thoughts arise, dwell, and disappear. These 3 are accomplished by mixing the conscious mind with space, or mixing the mind with breathing. But that the idea of this is to experience space, which we do through meditation practice. And this connects directly with the experience of gap, the open space between thoughts that we discover we can simply relax into. So we're already have some familiarity with the notion of space. We already have some experience of the notion of space through meditation practice. In Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, the book that we read as part of our preparation for study of the Vajrayana, it talks about the 5 Buddha families, and in particular, the family known as Buddha. The element connected with the Buddha family is space. And its wisdom aspect, it's called the wisdom of all-encompassing space. So it's space that accommodates all the other energies, all things, and that this is an awake, spacious kind of neutrality, you could say, that accommodates everything without bias. And that this is the wisdom of the Buddha family, which is connected directly with the notion of space. Again, the sense of space that we might experience if we let go of reference point, let go of preferences, let go of anything that kind of where we try to pin space down. It's kind of interesting too, because the neurotic expression of Buddha family energy is actually ignorance, dullness, or apathy. And this happens when, rather than opening up to a sense of space, opening up to a sense of openness, we tend to close down and focus on small things while ignoring other things. And that this, the sense of ignorance develops out of a very narrowed focus on space instead of an open, free, natural experience of space. The experience of space in the sense of just letting go, can be freeing. It can be very peaceful, be a profound sense of openness. But it can also be frightening. The loss of reference point from the point of view of ego is frightening, because we want some kind of ground, some kind of position to relate to things from. And I always thought that a really good example of this, the kind of what happened, this frightening loss of reference point. Have you seen the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock, where she's an astronaut in space and get hit with space debris? And there's a really well done shot in that movie. It probably works better on a bigger screen, where you see suddenly no connection to Earth, no connection to up or down at all. And there's a period of time where you just have this sense of complete loss of reference point in a kind of a frightening way, until you can kind of get oriented. I always think of that as an interesting metaphor for that. What happens when there's a grasping quality to our experience of loss of reference point? Although certainly in the movie it's understandable why she would want to know where's up and where's down in relation to Earth. I also say that space is sometimes used in the teachings as an analogy to point out qualities of the mind or qualities of the experience of awareness, particularly the non-conceptual nature of awareness, the ungraspable, unpin-downable nature of awareness. For instance, there's a quote from Saraha saying, "Although we thoroughly investigate the realm of space, it has no edge and no center, and our seeing stops. Similarly, by thoroughly investigating mind and phenomena, we don't find even a particle's worth of an essence. Since the thoroughly investigated mind is not observed, that not seeing of anything is seeing." So there's a sense of, again, experiencing that space-like quality of mind in the sense of being able to let go. Or Tilopa. For example, we use the term empty to refer to space, but space cannot be described as being like this. There's no basis for the expression, it exists like this. In that same way, the nature of mind is like space. So again, there's a sense in which particularly the open, free, non-conceptual nature of mind is similar to space in that it can't be grasped, can't be pinned down in any real, truly definable way. The difference is that with space is that the nature of mind also has the knowing quality, the cognizant quality of awareness. And so we have terms like the inseparability of awareness, emptiness, or clarity, emptiness, or luminosity, emptiness. You could also say finally that the 6 realms of existence, hell realm, hungry ghost realm, animal realm, human realm, jealous God, and God realms, are really neurotic or arise out of a very neurotic and confused sense of space with a lot of reference points in terms of biases and preferences and prejudgments of all kinds. So in any case, the topic for Trungpa Rinpoche's talk, which I'm getting to now, is space, but he's talking about space, I think, from the Dzogchen point of view. I have to say I'm a little less familiar with Dzogchen view and practice than I am with Mahamudra. So I hope I won't say anything misleading, or if I do, that John will clean up after me. But the basic topic of space is what Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about. And he says that the basic term for space in the Tantric approach is usually ying, Y-I-N-G in Tibetan, or dhatu in Sanskrit. And he says that dhatu means realm or essence. So when we use the word dhatu or ying, we mean psychological space. So realm is appropriate. And what he's saying by psychological space is that there's essentially no separation, no duality between the space that we're in and our awareness of that space. That without awareness of space, there's no space to be, there's no awareness. So the two are really inseparable. And he's talking about, again, psychological space, so realm is appropriate. And he says it's the particular environment that we're in. It's our environment as well as space at the same time. And he relates this to the practices that we've already done before approaching the Vajrayana. He says the practice of shamatha at the Hinayana level and Vipassana and Shunyata at the Mahayana level together brought about this particular sense of dhatu or yin into the situation. So in other words, in order to experience the sense of space that we're talking about here, again, some sense of space beyond simple reference point, beyond just simple convention, begins with our ability just to settle down in meditation practice and allow ourselves to experience gap, experience some kind of openness, experience some kind of freedom from thought after thought, following thought after thought, so that our awareness is distracted and dulled. And that's the practice of shamatha, not engaging in wandering mind, but being able to be steady. And then as we open to that, vipassana and shunyata experience, where there's more letting go, more awareness of less, as he says, less fixation on this and more experience of that. Or very much like what we talked about last week with the Maha-Adi piece, where he says the everyday practice is simply to develop a complete acceptance and openness to all situations and emotions and all people, experiencing everything totally without mental reservations and blockages, so that one never withdraws or centralizes into oneself. When we withdraw and centralize into ourselves, and we're closing off space, we're trying to possess space, and trying to ward off what we see as threatening or hostile in some way. So there's less solidification, and that's again the shunyata piece. He says in Tantra there's a different perspective in that there are different levels of dhatu. He says basically we're trying to relate to the origin of the origin of the origin of the originator origination. So simplify it a little, the origin of the originator origination. So we're really right back to primordial mind, the non-duality of mind and what mind projects, what mind creates. He says this sense of originator origination is not theistic in the sense of the maker of the world, but we're talking about some kind of transcendent intelligence, which is called rigpa, which we've talked about before, awareness, wakefulness, or vidya in Sanskrit. Vidya or rigpa in this case is not he says, is not the same as discriminating one for the other, my world, me and my world, from the point of view of dualistic split. So again, we're talking about very primordial first sense of awareness, basic sense of awareness. He says this is more in terms of a beam of light that shines constantly. And because that light shines constantly, that beam of intelligence, again, just our fundamental wakefulness, natural wakefulness, primordial wakefulness, is known in the tantric literature as the dawn of Vajrasattva. We were introduced to dawn of Vajrasattva back in chapter 1, the chapter titled The Dawning of the Great Eastern Sun, where he compares the dawning of the Great Eastern Sun to the dawn of Vajrasattva. And he says it's as though light is coming from the east, and we have the glimpse of the possibility of awakening. So dawn means to awaken, and Vajrasattva, or Vajra being, is what we're awakening to. So he goes on to say it's the dawn, the awakening aspect, the crisp winter morning of clarity and sharpness. This is, again, the basic sense of rigpa, which creates space at the same time, because it is the space. There's no separation between awareness and our awareness of space. We've let go completely of a sense of, as he said in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, perceiver and perceived. And there's just simply perceiving, simple being. It is indivisible with space. So there's no division between awareness and space on this level. But he does say there are different levels of space connected with rigpa, which is what we're going to go through now. But before I do, I just keep in mind, and this comes out of the questions and answers that follow the talk, where he says the dhatus up to the level of kaya are not particularly hierarchical. It's very tempting to try to see them that way, by the way. But he says they're not particularly hierarchical. They're more accentuated and expressive. Each time we go to the level of the next dhatu, it's more closer, more communicative, and more understandable to the samsaric world. But not hierarchical, so it's not a question of trying to understand these as a goal or, what would be the best or anything like that. That's, again, that right there, we're dealing with some kind of a dualistic approach. It's more a matter of just, again, as with a lot of the other things we studied in Vajrayana, having some ability to recognize when we're having these kinds of experiences. So the first type of space that he talks about is Vajradhatu, or Dorje Ying, which he says is the first space, primordial. And he says it's indestructible in spite of the clarity or distinctiveness of discriminating wisdom. So whatever we might be able to pick out, that essentially it's indestructible. And if we just reflect on the nature of space, it's indestructible in the same way. And again, this is another way that space is used as a metaphor for awareness. It's so all pervasive. It's everywhere. You can destroy the things within space. I could smash this computer, but that's not destroying space. That's just sort of a form within space. The space itself is completely indestructible in the same way that awareness is. And he says it's completely distinctive, completely clear, and it's immense. The basic quality of space is immovable because of its spaciousness, because of its all-pervasiveness. So it's, again, a very fundamental experience of openness, clarity, and boundlessness. And then again, in the just another piece from the questions and answers, where same questions, series of questions that began with the question about hierarchy. Would Vajradhatu be considered a higher reality then? And Trungpa Rinpoche says, well, Vajradhatu is regarded as basic space that accommodates everything, samsara and nirvana, long-term, short-term. At this point, the definition doesn't exist in terms, the legality doesn't exist. So it's a sense of space before there's any duality. So it's not a question of being higher or better, because that kind of question doesn't even come up. And again, it's like trying to pin down space. The second type of space that he talks about is the wisdom of self-existence, Rangjung Yi Yeshe, which he says comes from Longchen Ropjam and Jamgon Kongtrul. And he says, at this point, there's a sense of wisdom, a sense of being learned, a sense of being comprehensive, comprehending all kinds of things. So this seems to be a sense of space that's illuminated by the knowing, cognizant sense of mind. He says there's a sense of scrutinizing the phenomenal world in a very spacious way. Rangjung usually, John and I were talking about this, the Rangjung's usually talked about as self-arising. But self-existing, I think, kind of is getting at the same thing, that it's a sense of space that doesn't have any particular origin. It doesn't come from anything. It doesn't have a particular cause. So it's not dependent in any way on any one thing for its existence. It just is. It is because it is. And he says it's, which is what Trungpa Rinpoche says, self-existing because there's no reason why it should be. No reason, no purpose. We might be able to attribute the conceptual mind purposes, but again, that's thinking in terms of duality. But there's no particular attitude, but it is a sense of clarity, a sense of enormous clarity. This is the wisdom of self-existence, the clarity born with nothing. Then the next type of space that he talks about is primordial space, or Dome Ying. And at this point, he says there's some time and space concept begins to come into being in the psychological state of the practitioner. And he says this idea of mind is not new. It's not a newly discovered experience. It's not something we've been talked into or led into by metaphysical concepts. So it's not something that's created. It's not, again, not something that's fabricated or contrived. But one begins, as he says, one begins to realize its oldness quality. It's a primordial sense of space and time in the sense of endless beginning. So I think what we're talking about here is what we talked about before as fourth moment, the sense of eternal present. And I'll just read again the definition of fourth moment that was presented in the chapter titled Unconditional Ground. This particular type of consciousness or habitual pattern, the first is this particular type of consciousness or habitual pattern is what allows us to miss the reference point of understanding what is known as the fourth moment. So we don't want to miss the sense of fourth moment. The first three moments are the past, present, and future, and then there is a fourth moment that transcends all three. This moment is a pure moment that is not connected with what you've missed, what you're experiencing, or what you expect is about to happen. The fourth moment is a pure state of consciousness. It is clear and pure and free from habitual tendencies. So it's a sense of being fully present, just a simple being, without reference to past or future. and without relating to the present as some type of object that's definable. It's just simple being in the present moment, simple nowness, without reference to anything. So he says that, going on to talking about primordial space, Trungpa Rinpoche says that a person begins to feel that the beginninglessness is more important than what's there now at this point, and that this point also depends on that beginninglessness. He says it's old wisdom that's still new at the present moment. The old space is still up to date at this point. And he makes it very clear that we're not talking about something that started at the beginning, and that beginning is far away from us. It's now. And at the same time, it's primordial rather than just very old alone. It's very old because it didn't have a beginning, and therefore old and young could be together at once because it's up to date now. It is beyond age. It transcends age. So the final sense of space that he talks about is Dharmadhatu, which he says is further clarification in terms of understanding separate reality. So in this sense, it's space with all of the things that can manifest in space, all of the dharmas that we can experience in the world. Me and my perception, my relationships, my concepts of the phenomenal world, and so forth. Although he says at the same time, there's a sense of norm or law, a sense of how things work in the phenomenal world begins to come along. And he goes on to say there are so many ways of working, so many ways of being. The whole thing is endless, completely beginningless. So he says, Dharmadhatu is space, the space of complete and very intricate galaxies of intelligence and styles of operating in the phenomenal world. Yet, in spite of this crowdedness, it creates another space. Because so many dharmas exist, the crowdedness presents the dhatu element, the space element at the same time. So Dharmadhatu is the true nature of all things. It's sometimes connected directly with the experience of dharmata or isness. And again, I think that there's a line in sadhana talks about the mind being the nature of all dharmas, yet unbound by the dharmas, that I think really captures the sense of space that we're talking about in relation to Dharmadhatu. So that's the part that I came prepared to talk about tonight. We could discuss this further when we get to questions and answers, but for now, I'll turn it over to John.
You're muted.
Good evening, everybody. And thank you, Michael. I want to point out that this is really both abstract and ultimate, this discussion of space. He's talking about the sort of the ultimate descriptors of reality. And there is no sense of enlightenment or unenlightenment, confusion in these descriptions. Rather, it's just a description of the way things are. And the different kinds of space are describing different ways in which space manifests. We perceive it, it affects us. And he likens it to the discussion or the description of a building that you might see in the morning light at sunrise, at midday, and in the evening, and it would change the way you see it as the light changes in the time of day. Just so, these are just different qualities of the way we can describe space. So Vajradhatu, in Sanskrit, Durje Ying in Tibetan, has to do with the indestructibility of space. The fact that it accommodates anything and everything, all of these 6 kinds of phenomena: sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, and mental events, all arise and pass away within space, and space is completely accommodating and unaffected. It is indestructible. It can't be moved or changed. That's the Vajradhatu quality of it. And this is basically, he says that this is psychological space. Call it what you want. It's not my personal psychology. It's just the fact that it accommodates everything. And then the Ranjung Gyeshe, which can be translated, as he translates it, as the wisdom of self-existence, and can also be translated as self-arising wisdom. Yeshe meaning wisdom, non-dual wisdom, and Ranjung meaning it just arises and passes away by itself, or it exists by itself. This refers as well to the fact that the space is knowing. It's in union with knowingness. All this space that we're in here, you can see the windows and the sweater and the computer screen and hear the voices. All this is arising indivisibly with space. So space and knowingness, Rigpa, are one. And the Rigpa here is like a light. It's like a beam. It illuminates all of the phenomena. It's the fact that this space is in complete union with knowingness. It's both accommodating and it's illuminated by nothing in particular. And then finally, the primordial space, as Michael said, has to do with this quality that space is beginningless. We think everything has a beginning, and yet, where did all this start? Where will it end? It's just utterly beginningless and endless. This is the Dumeying quality of space. So what he's doing is he's describing these different aspects of reality. They have nothing to do with enlightenment or confusion. It's beyond that. It's in a different sort of different intellectual realm than the idea of a path to liberation from suffering. It's a descriptor of reality, the way things really are. Now, the next things that he described have to do with path. And this is the Dharmakaya. And he talks about Rigpa again, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya. Kaya means body. And these typically are the three bodies of the Buddha. We're going to discuss this more next week. And I frankly think that the discussion next week will be more interesting and understandable than this one. This one is very abstract, and it also very much has to do with path. So for instance, he talks about the fact, I'm going to reverse this a little bit from the way he presents it. If you look at Nirmanakaya, this is the emanation body of the Buddha, but it's really the emanation aspect of reality. And the fact is that this is Nirmanakaya, that this glass is Nirmanakaya. It has to do with the thingness, the existence aspect of the phenomenal world, that everything comes into being with a quality of isness, thingness, like the glass, like the piece of paper, like the sound of this word. All of these things are emanations out of space. They are nirmanas, appearances. And this is the Nirmanakaya, and it has certain aspects. One of the main aspects of the Nirmanakaya is that these things that arise, like these hands, this gesture, these words, have no true being. They constantly are coming into being and passing out of being. That's the way they manifest. That fact that they have no true being, they're just a constantly changing presentation, is the Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya refers to, it's like a cloud. I mean, it's the cloud of reality in which everything that we can possibly experience arises out of nowhere and passes away into nowhere. The nirmanas arise and pass away. And this is the Dharmakaya, that nothing has any true existence. It's sometimes described as almost the same thing as shunyata, absence of existence, shunya, voidness of I and other. And certainly that's part of Dharmakaya. Mm. And then there's the third kaya, Sambhogakaya, which he describes as being the body of joy. Sometimes it's called the pleasure body. or the body of manifestation, of enjoyment, excuse me. And what this refers to is that as the nirmanas, the apparitions, you might say, the things, this hand, this word, arise and disappear because they're part of the Dharmakaya, they nonetheless express what they are. The blue of this sweater, the sound of these words, the tactile sensation of this hand, the taste of whatever you are putting in your mouth. All of these things are expressions. This is the enjoyment body of the Buddha. So when things arise and pass away into nowhere, they do it by expressing themselves, expressing all the qualities that we can experience: red, blue, sweet, sour, soft, sharp, whatever it might be. This is the Sambhogakaya, the quality of communication. And they say that of these, the two lower bodies, that is the Nirmanakaya and the Sambhogakaya, are the form bodies of reality, of the Buddha, is the way they put it, but it really means of reality. And the Dharmakaya is the formless body of the Buddha. And again, another way of looking at them, they say that the Dharmakaya and the Sambhogakaya are unavailable to ordinary confused sentient beings. They can't see it because we are fixed on things that have true existence, and we can't see that they're passing away. So the upper two bodies, the Sambhogakaya and the Dharmakaya, are only the province of the bodhisattvas and the higher stages of the Mahayana path, the bhumis, whereas the Nirmanakaya is the realm of confused sentient beings, you and me and all the people who wander the earth unaware that they're Buddhas. So there are these two different ways of looking at it. So going back to what he says here of the Dharmakaya, he says at this level, intelligence begins to appear in terms of the awakened state or enlightenment, as opposed to samsara. When one experiences the Dharmakaya, it really, if you can experience it, it's the enlightened mind. And whereas confused beings go up, they first think they're Nirmanakayas, then they discover the Sambhogakaya, and that's the practices that we may well do as we enter the Vajrayana of visualization and working with the forms, the Sambhogakaya forms, yidams, dharmapalas, the protectors, the magical beings of the Sambhogakaya, and then ultimately achieving the Dharmakaya. Whereas enlightened people come down, enlightened Buddhas come down into the Sambhogakaya and then take form in the Nirmanakaya out of compassion for sentient beings and roam the earth as Nirmanakayas. The word, that's Nirmanakaya is Sanskrit. The word in Tibetan is tulku, and that is the name given to enlightened teachers. They are tulkus, Nirmanakayas in Sanskrit, tulku in Tibetan. So they have come down out of the Dharmakaya and through the Sambhogakaya into human form, into a Nirmanakaya form, out of compassion for sentient beings in order to help us achieve awakening and enlightenment. I'm just looking at my notes and seeing what else. There might be to say. Michael covered the dhatus very well. The dhatus, that description of the dhatus, again, is like a description of reality. It's not about path. It's not about confusion and enlightenment and going from one to the other. It's just about describing the way things really are if we have the eyes to see. I think I'm going to stop there, and we can have a discussion. Michael, do you want to add anything about the kayas?
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
I think you said it, explained it pretty well.
This is pretty ethereal topic. It doesn't get much more elevated in the Buddha Dharma than this. He's really giving us the landscape, as it were, of the enlightened state of mind.
Yeah, I think it really comes out in the question and answer where somebody asks him about the Trikaya and the 11th Bhumi, and he says, well, this is the view from above. Anyway, well, Shinyi has her hand up.
Shinyi.
Yes, thank you. Can you clarify again the difference between the Manakaya and Sambhogakaya? You seem to be referring to the form aspect, as you said. I'm just not exactly sure about the difference.
They're referring to two different aspects. All of these things are, all three kayas refer to the relationship of form and space. And the Nirmanakaya is, you might say, the existential value of form. The fact that this thing, exists as a solid entity. The Sambhogakaya refers to the fact that not only does it exist, but it communicates qualities, the clearness of the glass, the lemon inside it. It communicates what it is to us. That communication quality is the enjoyment body of the Buddha. And the fact that nothing has any true being, while we think it does, we literally think it does. But in fact, everything is a constant, I turn away and I'm not even seeing the glass. It's a constant arising and passing of phenomena. That is the Dharmakaya aspect, you might say. Would you agree, Michael? Or perhaps there's more to the Dharmakaya?
I think Sambhogakaya, it's sometimes it's connected with a speech principle. And, which is that notion of communication, the notion of actually experiencing things.
That things tell you what they are. The redness of red, the sweetness of sugar, everything communicates is the Sambhogakaya. And so they call it sometimes the enjoyment body, or in this instance, he talks about it as being the body of joy.
That's helpful, thanks.
These three aspects of being, that things have a presence, nirmana, that they don't have any real existence, Dharmakaya, that while they seem to be coming into being and passing out of being, nirmana to dharma, they communicate to us what they are: red, blue, hard, soft, loud, whatever it may be. That's Sambhogakaya. These three aspects of the way things are. This will become important as we progress along the path and our practices change. But really, from the beginning, I don't know if he makes this point in this chapter, that when we start practicing shamatha and vipassana meditation, we are working with the fact that the Nirmanakaya has no true existence in the Dharmakaya. As we follow the breath out, it dissolves into space, and here we are, nowhere. That is form dissolving into space. Nirmanakaya, Dharmakaya. So right from the very beginning, we're working with that.
There's a question in the in the chat from Steve asking about why the preference for the transcript to the chapter, and felt that he didn't see much difference.
Okay.
So that might, that's fine too. I mean, it really is the same material. Personally, I liked the question and answer in the transcript because it made it clearer what Trungpa Rinpoche was responding to. And the same material in terms of the questions and answers is embedded in the chapter. But it was helpful to me, at least, in getting some sense of what it was trying to get at, to see that it was in response to, questions from students, as opposed to part of the original presentation. And also, he presents Rigpa twice in the transcript. Once at the beginning, and then once again was in the transition between the space and the the three kayas. Whereas in the chapter, all this material on Rigpa is bunched together in the beginning, and I think you can understand it either way. When I actually went back and read the chapter after reading the transcript, the chapter made more sense to me than it did the first time too. But there's some differences that way that I think. Those are probably the two reasons why I tended to prefer the transcript myself.
And it says in the teachings, he doesn't really make this point in this transcript or the chapter, but it says in the teachings many times that Rigpa and Ying, space, intelligence and space, are in union. They are one thing. They're just different aspects. As we move through this space, it's intelligent, and that is the quality of Rigpa. It illuminates. In the Sanskrit, it's Vidya and Jnana, and Dhatu. Is it Vidya? Yeah, it's Vidya. And the two are in union. And this is the very nature of reality that we're all living in. We're separate from it. Literally think that.
I believe Miriam has her hand up.
They give me permission to speak now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for this teaching. I'd have to say this chapter for me was the most challenging. And John, I like what you just said around Rigpa and space in union is what we're talking about with the Dhatu, because the whole description of the different Dhatus, like I kept thinking to myself, who knows? Like this is born out of a human mind, a conceptual mind. Where is this coming from? Are these mystical impressions, images, insights, the result of enlightenment? But when you get into something that's put into words like this, that is so abstract, I wonder, does it have any validity? Right? And do some people agree on the nature of these Dhatus? Like, is there some sort of corroboration from different Buddhist enlightened people? Like, I'm just grappling with this and having a hard time taking it at face value.
I think the more we get into the Vajrayana, you're going to hear this more and more, and that this has evolved over the centuries. Buddhism is a constantly evolving project. There is no writ, where an unchanging statement. Rather, it's continually changing as new people come up with new ways of talking and experiencing this. And over the centuries, people have constantly collaborated and gotten together, great teachers, enlightened beings, and come up with new ways of putting it. And this one, these dhatus and this idea of space and yin and Rigpa, this goes back a long ways. It's been evolving for a long time. And there was Wasn't there a terrific quote in this chapter or in the transcript that was quite ancient? Let me see. I'd have to go look for it. Did we have anything from Saraha in this chapter, Michael?
I don't think so. I brought in something from something else, but I don't remember Saraha in this chapter in particular. I was going to say, in one sense, it's very abstract, but in another sense, we sometimes have these, I think we have these experiences, especially when we are able to, as we learned in the Hinayana text, mix mind with space, let go at the end of the out-breath, or just dissolve into awareness on the spot. And sometimes we just have a sense of complete without any particular reference point. Sometimes we'll just experience the world in a very vivid, fresh, vibrant way. Sometimes we're able to, just simply see, just be open to everything. And I think those different experiences, I think, kind of are what he's talking about, that we do experience in some momentary glimpses of either complete openness or, again, the complete freshness of immediate perception, or, you start noticing things you hadn't noticed before or paid attention to before. For years of meditation, it always embarrasses me in the summer when I suddenly realize the crickets have been chirping outside all along, but now I'm aware of it. Now I hear it. And the other time I was, I wasn't open. I was preoccupied. When I relax and just settle into, kind of immediate experience, there it is.
See, that makes sense to me. That's an experience.
Mm-hmm.
The way that it's described in the book, it's as reality. And, I've always thought that beginninglessness and all of that, like if I had an analogy to the cosmos, we need things that are tangible, right, to be able to visualize and understand. And with an analogy to the cosmos, it's like, okay, I can see that there's a holding space for everything that exists. It's without a beginning, it's eternal. So there I'm anchored a little bit. But I have to say, after listening to recent presentation on physics and the implosion of the world, I'm thinking of the cosmos, but this is not true, that it's self-existing and unchanging. And in a sense, the universe, the physical universe, is not quite analogous to these dhatus. And so I'm wondering, where is this coming from? And maybe I'm being too concrete, with respect to the kayas and the, coming and passing of experience, the need for space and emptiness, shunyata, that to me is accessible. It's those dhatus that I keep wondering, where did they get that? Because it goes beyond emptiness and space. It has a certain definition, right? And there's more than one. So, and they're slightly different. And this is where I started questioning.
I think there are different ways we experience it, but I think it's all one thing.
Well, that's good to know.
Somebody had their hand up.
I did.
Good. Good.
How's everyone? I think the point that John made, Miriam, about evolution is really, really helpful because, the first thing that I do when I try to, see some of these terms, and I will admit that I only try to figure out the Sanskrit because I just can't even get anywhere near the Tibetan. And looking them up on the net, and you'll see that these terms existed and exist in Hindu thought, and they're subject to different types of interpretation depending upon when in Hindu thought you're talking about. And then when you want to see what they mean in Buddhist thought. Again, which Buddhist school are you talking about? Are you talking about the Theravadins, the Mahayanas, and so on and so on and so on? So just like you, I've tried to grasp it. I've tried to put my arms around it. What does this mean? What does this mean? I need to have a handle on it. And I think the whole idea, at the end of the day, there is no handle. And there is no dogma. And isn't that the Buddha said, these are my ideas. This is my spin on it. This is what I figured out. It's by no means dogmatic. And certainly, given my Catholic background, I was raised with that there has to be a dogma, and there's only one way to interpret it, and that goes out the window.
Does indeed. Yeah, this is an introduction for you. But what's going to happen is that as you move into the Vajrayana, you will be given practices in which these terms have meaning. So, for instance, one of the first practices you may do, will be Nundro. And in Nundro, you start visualizing deities, and they have meaning, these deities. They represent, in one way or another, different aspects of your enlightened mind. And this becomes even more the case when you start moving into what's called creation and completion practice, where you are working with a single deity, perhaps, or at most two. And these represent different aspects of your enlightened mind, and they're very, very bizarre and colorful. And these are Sambhogakaya manifestations of wisdom, of enlightenment, of intelligence, of compassion, of skillful means, of all these enlightened qualities. And then ultimately, you will get beyond that even. See, that's the Sambhogakaya. And then ultimately, you will get beyond that into things like the formless meditation of the Mahamudra, which is advanced Tantra, or the formless style of meditation as it's taught in the Great Perfection teachings. And there, you're really at the top, looking down with the Dharmakaya containing the expressions of the Sambhogakaya and the manifestations of the Nirmanakaya. The Dharmakaya becomes wisdom. The Sambhogakaya becomes its incredible, colorful expressions. And the Nirmanakaya, the presence, like this, is actually the compassion aspect of reality. And so the practices that you're going to do, we're working with these different levels of understanding of what it is we're living in right now, and bringing it to life and deepening it. The truth of non-existence, the vividness of communication, and the heart of compassion and love. Is that fair, Michael?
Yes, I would say so.
And so I know it's difficult, but he's giving us an introduction. This is like saying, he's saying, introducing all this to us in a very, very fast, primitive way, a very beginning way.
Yeah. John, can I ask you something?
Yes, Judith.
I'm getting the feeling, tell me if this is correct at all, or in the right direction, that these kayas and everything refer to our experience of reality. In other words, the way we relate to the aspects of reality.
I would say that it's beyond our experience. It's simply aspects of reality. And it's not a personalized experience. Would you say, Michael?
I would agree. Yeah, I think so. And yet at the same time, we can look at things in our experience that might help us understand it. I have to admit, my first time I read through this chapter, it was difficult for me to grasp as well. I actually found it easier when I read the transcript. But that, as with a lot of things that I've studied, sometimes just contemplating and reading the material again in the future, it made sense to me that at one time made no sense at all. So it's entirely possible that we'll all have that experience with this material as well.
Here's hoping.
I always do.
I mean, when at seminary, he would come in sometimes and deliver this kind of material, and nobody would have any idea. It was the first time they'd heard it, and people were just stunned by it. And I remember at the 73 seminary, I'm writing this up actually, he came in and on the first talk about Tantra, we arrived at 7 p.m. and began to sit and wait for him. He arrived at midnight. We were exhausted. He then went into a much more difficult to understand explanation of Tantra than what you've read here. At one point during the Q&A, I was sitting next to Jeremy Hayward, who later he was my successor as president of Naropa. And Jeremy raised his hand in the Q&A and said, "Sir, do you think we could adjourn until tomorrow?" We were all falling off our cushions. He exploded. He banged the microphone. It was on a boom, away from him. He stood up. Other people were saying, "Sir, we don't agree with that." And he just stormed out. Oh, and I forgot. And I said, to my vast regret, after Jeremy asked if we could adjourn until tomorrow because we were all exhausted, I said, "I'll second that." And then he just stormed out. And Jeremy and I walked out practically with our heads in our hands. And somehow I found my way. He was down in the basement of the one of the hotels having a dinner at now like 1:32 in the morning, right? And I walked into this room and he was sitting at a table. He was sitting on the floor at a very low table, about 8 feet square, black. And somebody put 2 plates of food down in front of him. And he took the second one and he pushed it and slid it across the table to me. And I was sitting there in front of me and my stomach was in knots. I couldn't possibly eat it. And he looked up with this huge fiendish grin and said, "What's the matter? Not hungry?" Like that. And that was all of our introduction to Tantra. That was the first time he'd really introduced us that night.
Thank you for taking it easy on us.
Yeah. We're not him.
And just to second that, the presentation on Tantra I couldn't make in my seminary. I couldn't make head nor tail of most of it. On the other hand, I think I understand something about it now. I'm not saying it completely, but I have more of an idea. And I really wish he was around to talk to about it now.
Yeah.
Then I'd find out what I'm wrong about, but or whatever. Wherever it might go.
Thanks.
But I think it's a question of, what does this mean in terms of our practice? And I think probably the main thing is just being open to the possibilities and recognize them if, when they occur, and not holding on, not grasping.
And it's beginning to prepare the ground for Vajrayana, is what this is doing.
Done?
The space, you might say, if not the ground.
Yeah, Don has his hand up.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm touching on the idea or the, that was expressed that the nirmanas or the apparition is a manifestation of compassion. I get confused around that, because some things that are manifestations or aberrations don't seem like compassion. You know, like if I turn on TV and there's a show about the wildlife, and you know, six elephants or six lions are tearing an elephant apart. You know, I'm like, well, there's manifestation, all right, but I just don't see compassion in it or wisdom or anything. I'm like horrified. I don't know. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I could do it, or Michael.
Go ahead.
There are two aspects, you might say, regarding the compassion of Nirmanakaya. The simple and literal one has to do with the idea that Nirmanakayas are enlightened beings who have manifested on Earth, in our case on Earth, anywhere in the cosmos, for the benefit of unenlightened beings, out of compassion for them, to help them achieve enlightenment. That's one level. The second level of understanding the compassion of Nirmanakaya has to do with the fact that this world, whether you regard it as being lions tearing other animals apart or the beauty of a sunset, manifests so colorfully and beautifully and powerfully and vividly that it's constantly moving us. And when we begin to appreciate that, it moves us and it enlivens us and enlivens our hearts. And this is the true meaning of the compassion of the Nirmanakaya. It's not just it's in no way a feeling sorry for. And it goes beyond the compassion of a Buddha for sentient beings, although it includes that. And it has to do with this extraordinary beauty of the world and the way it's constantly manifesting so vividly, powerfully, and communicatively. So compassion here there are these three elements. The fact that nothing has any true existence is a constantly presenting and changing presentation. That as it does, it communicates what it is. And as it communicates, it has huge heart and meaning, joy. Sometimes they call it joy, dawa in Tibetan. Compassion, karuna, nyingje in Tibetan. So these three aspects to the way things present, the three kayas. Does that help at all?
Yeah, somewhat. It just jogged my mind about the idea of basic goodness, like you know, the wetness of wet. I'm still struggling with a little. Yeah, I could say the redness of and metallic smell of blood from what the lines are drawing, but you know, that's still a little hard to wrap around, but I think I'm following you.
Just to add something a little different. As we've read through some of these chapters in Vajrayana, we've talked about recognizing that we have within us, or that we actually are fully realized Buddhas, but we just don't recognize that. As one of the ideas in the Vajrayana, there's not even essence, or but it's actually there, but we don't recognize that. But part also of the Vajrayana is recognizing that's actually true of every being, and that it's waking up every being to that potential. So I don't know what the possibilities are in terms of lions, but that every being has that potential for waking up. But that goes back to the importance of the whole notion of the preciousness of human birth, that the human birth is the realm in which it is the easiest, or which is possible to attain enlightenment. So in terms of the natural world, it's trickier to understand exactly because there are cruel things. Nature, red in tooth and claw, and yet I don't know. There was a documentary I saw about the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone. So now you have a predator that preying on other animals, but it changed the entire ecosystem for the better, oddly enough. So what's that an expression of? I don't know, but it was interesting. A lot of other animals flourished, and it was because of this change to the ecosystem, reintroducing predator.
And also, there's confusion, unenlightenment, and that perverts all of this and turns, behavior of a lion into cruelty. On the other hand, the lion, loves its young and takes care of them. And there's genuine heart in that. So there's the fact that compassion gets distorted and perverted by ignorance, and certainly animals and humans are guilty of that. We all do it. We pursue our self-interest at the expense of others. And even that, you could say, if it's a perversion of compassion, it's still dealing with compassion.
I don't want to belabor it. It's just something I'm going to have to percolate around. I know one of the English translations of the dedication of merit is from the ocean of existence, may I free all beings. And when I think about it like that, I think about the suffering inherent in whatever, prey being subject to predators and old age, sickness, and death, and all of that. So it seems like there's this tension between the isness and the richness of experience that's really beautiful, and at the same time there's this suffering, and I don't know. I guess I'll just have to sit with that. I must admit that I think I have and this is probably not Vajrayana at all. Maybe it's more Theravada, but sometimes I have like almost kind of a resentment about the whole thing, like I'll see like wildlife, like cruelty in wildlife, or even, humans on humans or whatever. And I'm just like, what the hell is wrong with us, So yeah, I don't know, there's just this tension between the beauty in existence, and also there's something about it that's, I don't know. In Christian terms, I guess you'd call it original sin, right? Or something, I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to go on about it, but it's stuff that percolates in my head throughout the day when I'm at, whatever. Anyway, I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Somebody else had their, Jane, you had your hand up. You're muted, Jane. Jane, you're muted.
In reading this chapter, a lot went through my mind, but I couldn't get the film Everything Everywhere All at Once out of my mind. I don't know how many of you have seen it. I thought it was probably one of the most brilliant depictions of some of the stuff we're reading about and talking about, that visualized, made meaning out of this whole concept of what this chapter is called space. And this word that has now come into our everyday language of a metaverse, which really is derived from virtual reality, which didn't exist as recently as 5 years ago. So I think about, for me, I couldn't continue with either the Buddhist practice or my Jewish practice without, at varying points of time, taking leaps of faith. I think science has these breakthroughs. We have this web telescope. We have very close to proving, the unifying theory, a theory of everything. And we're coming closer and closer, and probably not in my lifetime, my children, maybe my great-great-grandchildren, we will know more. It's a process. But I think part of it, just like understanding that movie or enjoying that movie, that everything, everywhere, all at once, that all at once phrase stays with me, is very much like what I'm trying to glean from this chapter. And then that it's called space, and that time and space doesn't exist, and everything is nothing, is shunyata. It really all resonates with me. It's all one thing. It's about acceptance. It's about compassion. And at the end of the day, it's about a mother's love for its child. Bottom line, it is about love.
Yeah, that's great. Well, perhaps we should end. Anybody has anything more that they'd like to say, contribute? And if not,
We'll let it percolate and come to discussion group tomorrow night.
okay. So, Don, no, wait, sorry, it's Trip. I'll put the chants up.
Okay.
And I'll mute all.
We will close by reciting a prayer for peace and then dedicating the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Trip, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'll start over. We'll close by reciting a prayer for peace and then dedicating the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, Trip, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks,
Thank you.
John.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Everybody.
Night, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Thanks for everyone.
Thank you, Jay,
Wow.
and everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see you soon.